I'm Brittany. Standing in the mediation room, I stared at my family across the table. Their faces were a mix of desperation and expectation, but I was no longer the soft-hearted sister they once knew. The room was filled with an eerie silence, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. It all started when I sold my startup, a logistics and AI firm focused on optimizing supply chains for small to medium-sized manufacturers for a whopping $15 million. I thought this would be the moment my family would be proud of me, but little did I know it would be the beginning of the end. Growing up in a small town, I was the responsible one. My sister, Lily, was 28, 6 years younger than me, and she was always in some kind of trouble. My parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, were overly indulgent towards Lily. I was the one who learned to be self-sufficient early on. I filled out my own college financial aid forms, worked part-time jobs to pay for my expenses, and got straight A's without much praise. Meanwhile, Lily could barely pass her classes, but any small achievement of hers was celebrated like a major victory. One summer, when I was 19, I saved up $3,000 from fixing computers for neighbors. I was planning to use it to buy a car for my college commute. But Lily crashed the family car, and my parents convinced me to give them the money for a new one for her. They said it was a loan, but I knew it was more like a sacrifice. I ended up taking the bus for years while Lily drove around in a brand new car. I went to college and worked my way through, barely asking my parents for anything. Lily, on the other hand, hopped from one major to another, never really committing to anything. My parents always made excuses for her, saying she was too creative for the rigid college environment. After college, I started my own company. It was tough at first. I worked long hours in a small, dingy apartment, surviving on coffee and takeout. There were times when I almost gave up, especially after a major client fired me due to a technical glitch. But I persevered. I met a mentor, Ms. Jenkins, a retired businesswoman who believed in me and gave me the financial support and guidance I needed. As my company started to grow, my family's demands increased. Lily would call me whenever she needed money for rent or a new outfit. My parents would casually mention that they were short on property taxes or needed help with some other expense. I always helped, thinking it was my duty as a daughter and a sister. Then one fateful Tuesday, I received an email from a large conglomerate. They wanted to acquire my company for $15 million. It was a life-changing moment, but instead of feeling joy, I felt a sense of dread. I remembered all the times my family had taken advantage of me, and I knew this would change everything. That night, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was panicked, saying that my father had a heart attack and I needed to come home immediately. I dropped everything and rushed home. When I arrived at my childhood home, instead of a sick father, I found a set-up. The dining room was transformed into a boardroom, with binders and spreadsheets laid out. My father, looking stern, said, "Brittany, you've achieved great success, and now you have a responsibility to your family. We've drawn up a plan to distribute your earnings for the betterment of all of us." I was shocked. They saw me not as their daughter, but as a source of money. I refused to sign their so-called family distribution plan. It proposed that 60% of my post-tax earnings go into a family trust they would control, with a large sum set aside for Lily and her husband, Tom. Tom was a lazy man who had never held a steady job. I decided to dig deeper. I hired a financial advisor, Mr. Brown, to investigate Lily and Tom's financial situation. What he found was shocking. They were in deep debt, with multiple credit cards maxed out and a lawsuit pending against Tom for fraud in a construction project. They had used a hard money loan for a non-refundable deposit on a fast food franchise, hoping to get me to cover their losses. When I confronted them in the mediation room, they tried to play the victim. Lily cried and said she was drowning in debt, and my parents pleaded with me to help. But I was done being their ATM. I laid out my own terms. I would set up an educational trust for my nieces and nephews, pay for my father's medical expenses directly, and invest in Lily's career development, but I would not give them a single cent in cash. They were furious. Lily screamed at me, calling me cold, hearted, and my parents said I was destroying the family. But I stood my ground. I knew that if I gave in, I would be enabling their bad behavior and sacrificing my own future. As I walked out of the mediation room, I felt a sense of liberation. I had lost the family I once hoped for, but I had gained my freedom and integrity. 6 months later, I received a drawing from my niece, thanking me for her new school. It was a small reminder that I had done the right thing, protecting the next generation from the cycle of dependency. I've since moved on with my life. I've found new friends and a new sense of purpose. I've learned that family doesn't always mean blood, and sometimes you have to draw a line to protect yourself.